One of the consequences of this new situation is that whereas the number of hungry people in the world during the closing decades of the last century was coming down, as we entered the new century, the current decade, it began to turn up. It bottomed out at about 825 million, and then in 2007 went over 900 million. 2008 went over 1 billion, and is projected to keep climbing in the future. I haven't seen any recent projections that show the price of grain going back to traditional levels. Their price of grain is projected to be higher in the future, not lower. So we have more hungry people. And that puts more stress on governments. Spreading water shortages, higher food prices, dwindling oil resources, all these things put stresses on governments. And so we now have something that's historically fairly recent in terms of the modern world, which is failing states. The term failing states has only entered our working vocabulary in the last decade or so. During most of my career that began in Washington in the late 1950s, we were building states. It was the period of decolonization and the breakup of the Soviet Union, so there were many, many new states created, and now we have this phenomenon of failing states. Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, Haiti, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Nigeria, Pakistan. Pakistan, the first failing state with nuclear weapons. Nigeria, a failing state that's also an oil exporting state. And failing states can create problems for the world. Afghanistan almost overnight became the world's leading source of heroin. Yemen has become a base for pirates, in effect. I was reading an article in The Economist early this year, and it was describing the state of piracy in the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, and they were pointing out that the earnings by the pirates who capture the ships, hold hostages for ransom, that the earnings in 2009 had doubled those of 2008, and they were discussing the conditions that made this possible and so forth. And it occurred to me that this article in The Economist was reading like a corporate annual report. They were talking about earnings and prospects and so forth. I mean, it was almost an eerie sort of situation. So if I were to look at indicators that I think are going to tell us more about our future, our economic future than anything else, it would be environmental indicators, particularly those that are affecting the food supply that I mentioned. If I were looking at it for a social indicator that would tell us, give us some clues to the future, it probably would be the number of hungry people in the world. If I'm looking at a political indicator, it would be the number of failing states. And as the list of failing states grows longer, it raises a disturbing question of how many failing states before we have a failing global civilization. So these are the challenges we face, and Plan B is a response to these challenges, a recognition that we need to turn a lot of trends around in a hurry, whether it's falling water tables or rising CO2 emissions. I think our days are numbered in a sense, and it's difficult to overestimate the urgency of what we need to do and how quickly we need to do it. Plan B has 4 basic components. cutting carbon emissions 80%, not by 2050, but by 2020. That's almost a wartime mobilization to restructure the world energy economy. We started with the basic science, and we asked the question, how much and how fast do we have to cut carbon emissions if we want to have a decent chance at saving the Greenland ice sheet, for example? Cutting carbon emissions 80% by 2020 doesn't guarantee that we'll be able to save the Greenland ice sheet, but it certainly greatly increases the prospects that we'll be able to do that. If we can't save the Greenland ice sheet, and I sort of use this as a metaphor for the future of civilization, if we can't save the Greenland ice sheet, then eventually we're looking at a 7-meter rise in sea level. Even a 1-meter rise in sea level would shrink the rice harvest in Asia because it would inundate so many low-lying river deltas and floodplains.